Elena Tato, and welcome to this webinar. This is part of the Ōtautahi Learning City Christchurch week, and this webinar is focused on maintaining the best of hybrid, flexible learning approaches beyond COVID. So my name's Ray Burkhill, and I work for Grow Waitaha Core Education, and my co-host this morning is Greg. I'll just allow him to say hello.
Kia ora koutou, ko Greg Takongoa. I'm here with Leadership Lab working with Grow Waitaha, so great to be with you, working with these colleagues.
And I want to welcome and thank our three panel members today. We have Anita Yarwood, who's Director at our Tawhiti Unlimited Discovery. Morning, Anita. We've got Liz McDowell, who's Deputy Principal at Avonside Girls High School, and Tony Melton, who's Deputy Principal at Lincoln High School. So our format for today is to allow each of our panel members to just talk a little bit about their experience throughout COVID as they've attempted to provide a hybrid learning environment for students. And each panel member will have 10 minutes to just talk a little bit about that. And then what we'll do, we'll just go into a little bit of a general discussion around what we've heard. It may be if a few more people arrive, we might go into smaller breakout groups, but right now with the number we have in the room, we might just stay together. We'll see how that goes. And then each panel member will get their 10 minutes with a little chat in between. And as we go along as well, we'll just invite you to add any questions or wonderings into the chat, and Greg and I will collate those questions. And for the last 10 minutes or so, we'll just pose some general questions to our panel members and just talk with one another about that experience before we wrap things up at 10 o'clock. So I think we're going to start with you, Liz. So if you would like to introduce yourself and share your screen, and we look forward to hearing about your experience at Avonside Girls. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, e te mana whenua, tēnā koutou. Ko wai aho, noa Ōtautahi aho, he tangata tiriti aho, ko McDowell toko whānau, ko Liz toko ingoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Good morning, and it's my privilege to share our experience with you this morning. I'm just going to share my screen and hope that this works well. Cheryl, can you give me a thumbs up? Brilliant. Okay, so I thought that I might take a little bit of time just to begin with to talk about what hybrid learning meant for us. Obviously, it's a combination of faith-based learning and independent learning, and that independent learning is usually being done off-site. This occurs and has occurred for us in different scenarios. So, during Alert Level 3 that we had several times in the previous years, we had combinations of students at home and on site. We also, this year, moved into a phase 3 hybrid learning model here, where we had certain students having days at school and then other days learning independently at home. And we've moved, I would say now, into a different hybrid learning situation where everybody is technically at school on site full time, but we're finding that we're still catering to a large number of at home learners who can be at home for anywhere between 2 to 3 days to 2 to 3 weeks. So we need to be really deliberate about what we're doing to best cater for our students' needs and our teacher workload, so that the students are being provided with equitable learning opportunities wherever their location. So therefore our online learning, which is occurring at a distance, needs to be effective and equitable. The first question we were posed was opportunities that we took to promote our hybrid learning model. And we did this with our whānau, with our kaiako, our staff, and our Arkhanger, our students, through the lens of health and safety of all. Our rationale, or our why, was keeping everybody safe. We've got vulnerable people in our community, and we really wanted to make sure that we kept everybody healthy and safe. Also, that meant that we could provide quality of teaching and learning with students and seeing their teachers We were also looking for the resilience of our staff for the remainder of the year in this sort of hybrid learning situation. So for us, the shape of our phase 3 model, which we moved into, I think it was week 5 of this of term 1, and that was 2 days of face-to-face learning, whether you were a senior student or a junior student, different days of the week for them, and then 3 days of independent learning. One of those was a Wednesday that we named that Wellbeing Wednesday. We had all of our learners learning from home on that day with a specific focus on wellbeing and connecting kaiako and whānau and speaking with families and checking that everybody was doing okay. How it was signalled to our Arkhanger, promoting our hybrid learning model to them. The use of live virtual assemblies from our tomoaki, because of course back in the red setting we only had the ability to have 100 people together inside, so our virtual assemblies were really valuable to give them the messaging they needed. We also used vlogs, recorded video messages on Facebook. We had a dedicated channel on our website for whānau, just to really promote what that might look like, when we would do that, so that everybody knew and could see it signposted really early. Ultimately, we trialled 2 models because we sought feedback and we reiterated. So the first was 2 on and 3 off, as I spoke to before, and then we moved to alternate days. So seniors on a Monday, for example, juniors on a Tuesday, and carrying on like that. We were trying to meet the needs of everyone, of course, and we have here on this co-located site, we've got students that work between both schools. So we've got some of our learners move over to Shirley Boys for some classes, and some of their boys move over to our site for classes. So we really needed to take their needs into consideration. And we have senior students who are out on SDP courses on Fridays. So our model really needed to work well for everybody. And it didn't so much for those students that worked between the 2 schools on the site. So we tweaked the models in response to feedback from everybody. There's a link here on this slide as a staff, and this is to a presentation that we provided to staff on day 1 of the year. I'm really happy to share that with anyone that would like it. I won't move into it at the moment, but it was dedicated to introducing hybrid learning, talking about the stuff that we'd learned along the way from our lockdowns, what worked well, what didn't, and making sure that we had captured the best practice from that time and brought that into what we were doing this year. And then our staff moved into their learning areas and unpacked what that might look like for them. A really small example of that would be that we have an Office 365 school here. We made a conscious decision to move everybody that needed to have a class team. And within that, they needed to have a channel set up that was called, for want of a better term, the COVID channel. And if you were away as a kaiako and you were so sick and unwell that you couldn't actually, communicate or set relief, that was already previously set up with up to 2 weeks of independent learning, so that the learners would be supported with that subject. We have an on-site staff team and an off-site staff team. We use the off-site Microsoft team in lockdowns. And of course, we don't have lockdowns anymore, so we've moved permanently into the on-site staff team. In there, we promote the hybrid learning model with each other. We've got a dedicated channel. We have how-to videos being shared by each other. Navigating around Teams, creating screen recordings, seeing what the student view of turning in assignments looks like. Poako, our form teachers, they promoted it by contacting home weekly, as I said before, and really promoting that connection and that exists in the hybrid model. And a kaiako example was that they felt that they promoted it within their classes by developing ways of more consistently using the features of the tools we've decided on. And one example from our English area is they specifically used the announcements and OneNote in a more consistent fashion with their learners. And they felt that that really promoted it positively, because the students felt confident that they knew where they were going and what they were doing. I've kind of interspersed feedback slides through this presentation. This is a really small snippet of the feedback that we received from our whānau. I've kind of given a snapshot of year 9 to year 13, and I'd like to draw your attention to the one at the top. We had a year 13 parent really highlight for us the issues around the scheduling for students with classes that were shared at Shirley Boys, and the confusion that meant for the learners, and it was that sort of stuff we really took seriously, and so pivoted our model of what that hybrid learning looked like, and so for the final 2 weeks of term, we tried to alleviate that sense of concern. And overwhelmingly positive feedback. They felt that people were being protected, and they really appreciated that there was still the co-curricular and extra curricular activities occurring because school was open. Our next question was, what have we learned along the way? The short answer is a lot. And I've tried to put the amount onto 2 slides, but by no means, this is just a snapshot. We've learned that we can't suit everyone, and that doesn't sit well. So we are really trying to actually suit everybody with our hybrid learning model, and we're continuing to work in that space. Keeping it simple, our messaging, our instructions, our teaching and learning programs, just keeping it simple. Consistency and repetition, that makes, while still allowing for creative difference. The repetition of format, so students feel familiar with what they are doing. And we really have learned that that blend of having students on site in combination with learning at home, so much better in our context than during those lockdowns where, we were locked out of our kura. It's such a great opportunity to be able to feedback in person, to clear up any confusion, to embrace that flipped learning model. We conducted practical lessons in the face-to-face time, and then there was theory and write-ups at home. We learned an enormous amount about apps and tools that support online learning, like Canva, the narration tool on PowerPoint, learning tools in Microsoft. I guess we really appreciate the fact that during the COVID pandemic, that it has put an enormous spotlight on the amount of resources and professional learning that is out there. And, it's a huge impetus to take it on board and embrace it. And the all-important use of YouTube resources. So there's no recreating the wheel. If you've got an explanation of an aspect of calculus on YouTube, why create your own video if it's a perfectly good one that exists already? Here's a little snippet of our kaiako feedback. Again, it was overwhelmingly positive. And I just want to draw your attention to point 3, which talked around the challenge to learn names of new students. And I guess this is kind of where I want to focus, would be with our new year 9s. We had 5 weeks of full-time face-to-face time with them to form relationships, and for them to form relationships with their peers, their kura, but also the tools, right? The devices that they were bringing. Some of them, they were new devices for them, and also Office 365. A number of our students come from Google Schools, and so it became, I guess, highlighted that inequity between our new learners and our older learners with the tools that we were using, and the brevity of time that we had with them to get them to the point where they were au fait with them. And what else have we learned? So carrying on with this was flipping. It's not new, but it's something that we have been looking at and working with and trying to get more and more effective. Creating our own recorded videos and building up libraries of video resources, because we have learned that our Arkhanger really like hearing their teachers' voices, and using that in combination with ready-to-go resources. We've learned about the disconnection for some of our students in the time away from school, and the impact that has on mood and motivation to reconnect. We're working a lot in this space at the moment. term loans. So I guess to explain this, we used to operate a daily loan device system through our library, kind of like borrowing a textbook or a library book for the day. They could borrow a daily device. Over the lockdowns and over this year as well, we have moved away from that model to term loans. Not only do we see a better sort of feel of a sense of ownership from our students about that device, but more importantly, we are providing a much more equitable experience. If you can take that device home with you permanently and not just in small weeks of times like lockdowns, then this is one of the hugely important things that we can do to support all of our learners. Professional development, so important for our staff and how to use and feed information through. And that learning also for our students by both their kaiako and their poako, preparing for hybrid learning was really valuable. Explicit teaching of, for example, how to have a Teams meeting before we moved into that phase 3 schooling. As I said before, we certainly noticed there were a number of year 9 students who struggled with cognitive overload. Here's a snapshot of our Arkhanger Feedback. Across the top is kind of the themes of the feedback that we received from the different year levels. And while year 11, the theme overall was NCEA, they were also really useful information about how to be more clear, how to be consistent, mixing up the types of work, for example. Could you give us some online stuff? Could you give us some paper stuff? We don't want to be existing entirely in an online world. Really, really useful. And this is something that we are continuing to work with. Our plans to intentionally maintain the best of hybrid and flexible learning approaches beyond COVID. We're taking this really seriously. We have an IT committee, which is made up of essentially one person from each of our learning areas. We're spending this term looking at formalising our hybrid learning practices as a kura. We want to take the best and discard the rest. We are also wanting to continue PD in this area for our kaiako, particularly in the space on how do you teach to the students who are in class and at home concurrently in a way that's sustainable, and using supports like Derek Wenmouth's Codifying Teacher Practice article. We've been using that as a really useful resource, and started with the first chapter on equity, had a really cool discussion using that as the centre of our conversation. And our final question was, how is innovation and equity making a difference? So as I said before, our term loan approach, that big picture availability and accessibility, really, really important. The GCSN and MOE assistance with internet connections at home has been hugely important in terms of equity. Using UDL, Universal Design for Learning, of course. This isn't new, but it is particularly effective in allowing us to become more equitable, and utilising learning tools like the Microsoft Immersive Reader, enormously important in providing equity for our learners. Every class has a class team. It's normal. It's our normal. Students know where to go, and the teaching tools within teams provides an enormous amount of equity, particularly with the students being able to choose what kind of product they provide to demonstrate their learning and understanding. Our staff PLD and meeting time and our professional learning groups, collaborative inquiries, we've got a particular focus on equity. Our library being available at all times to any student. So in our phase 3 hybrid learning model, while we had, for example, seniors on site on a particular day and juniors were learning from home, that the school was open. So if there was any student who was at home but would have a more equitable experience and access to their learning on site, then they were more than welcome to come in, and did, and were able to access staff and resources in the library. Students, we heard that students met up in each other's houses where their learning could be really social. They did it together, and they had appropriate spaces and resources there as well. I thought that was really cool. Of course, flexibility in assessment where possible, allowing that warm and demanding approach so that no matter where you are and what type of environment you're learning in, that we are working with you as best as possible. And my final slide was just an example of the resource library combined with ready-made content. This is one of our kaiako and what they've been working with. Thank you very much.
Oh, kia ora, Liz. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. At the start today, before everyone arrived, you expressed some concerns whether you had enough to say about equity. And that slide that you just had up there was absolutely amazing, how those different approaches to equity had been brought to life. So thank you so much for that. Lots of questions in the chat there, and please keep adding those. Welcome to people who've joined us since we kicked things off. What we're about to do now is move into probably maybe 3, Greg, breakout groups. And so we're just going to focus on a couple of questions which I've put in the chat there. What grabbed your attention from Liz's story about maintaining hybrid best practices into the future and addressing equity. So we'll just go away for 5 minutes or so. We'll just have a chat about those things, come back in, and then we'll roll into Tony's story.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everyone, sorry, there's never enough time in a breakout room. I know that it's a universal truth, but there we go. But hey, look, any questions or any sort of observations that you didn't get a chance to talk about, please just pop them into the chat, and we'll certainly pick up on them before the end of the session today. Okay. Greg, over to you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be able to welcome Tony to come and share some of their journey they've had out at Lincoln High School. So kia ora, Tony.
Kia ora, thank you everybody. I'm sort of probably going to be speaking more from a generic sense in terms of our experiences over the last 15 months. So I'll start off by talking about the opportunities taken by us in terms of how we sort of navigated the last year and a bit. So when we were in lockdown, we customised our student timetable. So we went to our staff and we said, look, we don't want anyone delivering period 1 classes because our staff had their own families to be dealing with under a lockdown situation. So and we only asked staff to identify half of their regular lessons where they would want to be delivering or be available, shall we say, online. So we went through and changed our timetable so that students knew when they should be available or their staff were available online. And we went sort of through that, as many people did, you know, setting the work at the start of the week, and then there'd be a period later in the week whereby the staff were available to answer questions. So students had that flexibility in terms of they knew what they had to get through in that week, but they had the flexibility of knowing that their teacher was available online during certain periods if they needed additional information or needed to touch base. Video instructions were very much utilised so that students could revisit the instruction. We had a variety of students who had other obligations at home and weren't always available when our online timetable indicated that they should be online with their teachers, so that they could go back to videos and go, I missed that one because I've had other personal obligations during that period of time. Very much flexible timelines through from NCA timelines to timelines for our junior work. We were extremely flexible on when students were able to deliver. And some staff also, even when we started coming back to school last year, some staff were using what they called like a flexi period, whereby one of the periods in that week, the students, there'd be no teaching or delivery of new material. It was a chance where students could touch base with the teacher and go, I just need some reinforcement. You might be working on work from another subject. It was up to the students how they use that period to help so they could maintain their work levels or as they meet deadlines from other subjects if they wished. So those flexi periods, even their juniors, knowing that the particular period of the week that they go, right, that's sort of my catch-up time, and I'm sort of managing or deciding what I'm going to do during that period. This year, last term, we had no online learning as such. We did roll some year levels home near the end of the term. If you looked at our absence data from staff and students in terms of who was away impacted by COVID, the data would have suggested that we didn't need to roll year levels home. The reason we did it was to help us get through to the end of the term because staff were exhausted, literally exhausted. And it was more from a wellbeing point of view from our staff. So we don't focus on level 1 NCA year 11, and that was a godsend over the last 15 months. And we have year 11 semesterized programs, so we could adjust those if we were losing time. We weren't under the strain of having to push our students through a qualification. So when we rolled our year levels home, we decided we wanted to keep things as normal as we could for our year 9s, and they never were rolled home. They were here every day. We sort of thought this is their first year of high school. We wanted them to feel like they were part of school as much as we could, and so they were here every day last term. Our 12s and 13s, we sort of grouped together. We tried to prioritise them being here as much as we could to keep their NCA qualifications on track. And our 10s and 11s, we grouped them together too, so that they were rolled home on certain days together. So sort of 12 and 13s were either here or they weren't. 10s were either here or they weren't. 9s were always here. We also sort of chose specific days of the week so that we weren't hitting certain lines of our timetable being impacted more often than others. Having staff experiencing some year levels being away enabled them to catch their breath. There was no online instruction when those students were rolled home for a day or two during the week. They knew what to carry on with from classwork that would set. They would then go home. They knew what they need to finish. The teachers weren't available online on those rolling days home. It was a chance for our staff to catch their breath and get through to the end of the term. Another thing we did too for our NCA students last term, our year 12s and 13s, we gave them the choice whereby if they'd been away quite a lot due to COVID, they could defer their internals that they had missed to term 4 after the exams, so that they could then choose, do I actually need to do that internal? Do I need it or not? Some students adopted that, and it is making a difference to them going, it's there if I want it. I'll decide at the end of the year if I need to actually pick that assessment up, so that they didn't feel constantly behind and trying to catch up and be behind the 8 ball. What have we learned over the last 15 or so months? We've learned we've got to listen to our staff and our students. The feedback that we were gaining has led us to reviewing a lot of things that we do here, and we've made sure it's those vulnerable, anxious people as well, be it staff or students, valuable voices that they have been keeping us informed on where we should, how we should be approaching COVID, and where we're going with it. It is the whole listening aspect has been a priority. We've really learned we've got to listen. We've learned how to prioritise. We've learned what do we need to keep doing and what would we like to be doing. And an example of that is in terms of what do we need to keep doing. We have a 6-year curriculum plan, and part of that has been, we no longer do level 1 NCA here, and we're semesterising the whole school, and we're trying to get the whole school on the same timetable. It's a 6-year approach. We're sort of getting into our 3rd year now, and we thought we've got to keep hold of that. We can't lose that. We can't let COVID derail something that we've been planning and are partway through. That was an absolute need. It wasn't a want, it was a need. And so we've kept to our plan as a way of trying to keep things as normal as possible. And we've also, especially last term, with no online learning, with everyone being here despite rolling some year levels home, we've also been reducing the out of school commitments for our staff in terms of meetings and things like that. So that whole prioritising has been really important to cut some slack where we can, but keep hold of what's still important to us. What else have we learned? We've learned that with only having 2 year levels focusing on level 2 NCA has been a godsend. As mentioned before, we've been able to adapt our Year 11 programs to accommodate any loss of time because we're not under the restriction or under the pressure of pushing our students through level 1 standards. And so we've been able to adapt our Year 11 programs. That's been a huge win for us. Fortunate timing, I guess, of when we made these changes, then COVID came along. We've also learned too that setting rigid timelines for our students in particular is not a way to go. Flexibility in terms of our timelines for student deadlines, our timelines for some of our staff is critical because some people are finding it really tough to keep their nose above water. We've also found that our semester programs provide huge flexibility because we can adapt things like if we've lost time during a semester 1 due to having to be locked down or whatever, we get to reset in semester 2 and start from fresh. So we found last year our semester 2 courses in particular sort of ran as normal, whereas we had to adapt things more in semester 1 due to lockdown. So having a sort of a reset halfway through there because of semester programs has been a real advantage. We've also learned that students love having social contact. When we did come back to school last year, that was huge. It was just amazing to observe the students wanted to just be in personal contact with each other. And obviously that isolation for some did lead to disengagement. So the importance of, we found, that importance of the social importance of being at school was really emphasised once we came back from COVID. We also learned don't judge when you're going through that sort of remote learning program when we were in lockdown. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know what students and staff are experiencing. And so therefore we cut slack. When students came back, if they hadn't done the online work that we'd set, we didn't judge them for it. We said, right, you haven't done it, but let's just move on. It wasn't a case of you haven't done it, you need to catch up. Because as I say, we found out through our pastoral systems just incredible stories of what some staff and students were dealing with. The other thing too is what we learned is our feedback from staff, students and community has probably led us to be more reflective, and we've reviewed a number of things and we've probably, as a result of this, have been gaining more student voice in the last year than we normally have. Has that been prompted by COVID? I think it has. Intentional, what are we intentionally maintaining the best of in terms of our hybrid and flexibility experiences? We are still, and it's very much becoming part of a standard approach to our delivery, is that video instructions are becoming far more familiar. We still have flexi periods in some courses where the students get to choose, even as I say juniors, on what we're going to do this particular day. It may not relate to the subject that they're in. We are very much in keeping with our Year 11 program and not doing level 1. We managed to sort of weather last year and last term with our new approach, and it sort of reinforced that if we got through last year in particular with not doing level 1 and having semester courses, then we probably weather most storms. But the main thing for us too that we're intentionally keeping at the forefront of our minds is flexibility. Flexibility is absolute key. We aren't through, obviously. I mean, right, even this term, we're not through the COVID thing yet. So we're still learning on what we can still be keeping as part of our long-term regular delivery. But one of the things, I guess the biggest thing that's come out of it with COVID is that BYOD was always there, right? We were plodding along like most schools were. COVID came along and gave us the push that we needed to go, geez, we have to know how to deliver online delivery because we had no option when we were in lockdown. And that's been a really good thing. It's sort of been that little motivator that we've needed to push us. So we are a Microsoft school. We use Microsoft Teams. It is just part of our fabric now, thanks to COVID. That's how we communicate with students. That's how we deliver and store our curriculum material. It's really interesting. The really, really quiet kids that we wouldn't hear from in a classroom environment now know how to use Teams to communicate with us. And it's sort of a bit of an equity thing from my perspective, is that we're hearing some student voice that we'd never hear in a classroom environment before, because they know that even out of class, they can message their teacher through Teams and they can have that private interaction without the embarrassment of having to stick their hand up in class. So that's been, but yeah, Teams, we're all over Teams now, and the students don't know anything different. Equity, Through the last year's experience, the one thing that we put a huge effort into was making sure all our students had access to laptops. So through the ministry program of having laptops loaned to us, we really didn't have too much of an issue with our students having access to IT to be able to engage in online delivery. Those students that, in terms of an equity point of view too, those students that weren't engaging online, we put a lot of work in from our pastoral team to find out why. Why isn't they weren't? We were doing attendance, not from a punitive perspective last year, but we were just keeping a record of who were attending the lessons online as scheduled with their reduced online timetable. And then our pastoral team would pick up that data and get in contact with families and going, notice Jimmy hasn't been in contact with many of our online lessons recently, what's going on? And we found out that many things behind the doors were happening. But that sort of data gathering enabled us to make sure that everyone, we wanted to find out, was there a reason why they couldn't? Was there something that we could help out with? So generally speaking, our students did have access, but due to personal circumstances, maybe they weren't able to engage in our online learning. In terms of the equity too, let's say those quiet students, some of our students actually preferred the online delivery, which was again, those sort of quiet, maybe anxious, more vulnerable students who aren't comfortable in a populated room, they liked having that flexibility. They liked having a time where they knew they could message their teacher in private. And so for them, it was quite a positive experience. I guess the other thing from equity though too is we were asking ourselves, has COVID prompted us to being more reflective and gaining that feedback? I think it has. And so on a more of a generic sense, you know, we have been gaining more feedback to the point now we have a really strong student, what we call a student executive. They're our sort of touch-based group, which are a cross-section of students who are of all walks of life, who sort of, if we're thinking about an initiative, we will go to them and ask for feedback. As a result of being maybe more reflective from COVID, too, we are looking into having a Māori liaison group, a student group that we can, as an SLT, communicate with, getting perspectives from a Māori perspective. We put effort into a within school leadership role that has led us to questioning, should we be streaming at the school any further? In terms of, for 2023, we're very close to making that decision now. And I'm sort of thinking, would we have maybe initiated more of these decisions around student group, student voice? Should we be streaming? Would we have got onto that as soon as we have if we didn't experience COVID? I'm not sure. I think COVID has prompted us to listening, review, instead of us going through year on year. This is what we do. This is what we do. I think COVID has been a bit of a prompt for us. All right. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks so much, Tony. And again, some fantastic challenges and responses and simplicity, but also complexity that you shared in those thoughts there. So really appreciate your time on pulling that together. So we're going to, time runs away as always, but do think it's valuable to pop into those rooms, same rooms, again, same questions, chance for you just to go, just 4 minutes to go, what grabbed your attention from that journey? Because again, different school, different journey. It can't be the same for everybody. And so we'll see you back in 4 minutes. Thanks so much.
This meeting is being recorded.
Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. And by no means do the breakouts need to be where the conversation stopped. We really encourage you to you'll go into breakouts once more before the end, and a chance for you to be able to even swap emails and keep these conversations going after this. So over to you, Ray.
Kia ora, Anita, your turn. And so just to reintroduce Anita Yarwood from Ōtautahi, and over to you, Anita.
Thanks, Ray. Kia ora koutou. My name is Anita Wood. I'm the director at Tawhiti. I've been here for, actually, this is my 2nd year. So I'm not sure how many people know about our kura, so I just want to spend 2 minutes just putting it into context, and then we'll talk about what we've been doing over the past year and a bit. So our school is our Tawhiti Unlimited Discovery, and there's some photos of it, so you can see immediately it's not a traditional space, it's very much a flexible learning environment. Next slide, please. And this is just a snapshot of our students. So we are a year 1 to 13 kura, this just gives you an idea. So in one of the pictures, there's the home base group up on sort of the top left. Then next to it, we've got some 7-8 boys who, with our property manager, spent the day last year in Matariki doing hangi and serving it up to the community. Down to parents who are down at the bottom. There's Rob and his son Charlie. So parents are welcome on site whenever they want. They can sort of wander in and out, spend time with their children, and just a range of other kids at our school. And next slide, please. Okay, so we came into existence in 2014 as a result of the Christchurch earthquakes. It's a merge of 2 schools, one of which was Discovery 1 and then Unlimited Paenga Tawhiti. And they both had physical sites that were destroyed in the earthquake in 2011. So this school has been through huge change since the earthquakes in 2011. We have a special character. We are a state school and we're funded the same as everyone else, but our special character means that we have to provide a different style of education where children are central in directing their own learning. And that's what was gazetted in 2013. It gives you an idea of the nature of our school. We do a lot of education outside the classroom. We're sort of classrooms without walls where learning takes place anywhere, anytime. It isn't limited to just the academic in the classroom. Thanks, Greg. Like other principals around Christchurch, we had lockdown last year, and then we went and sat in this ministry meeting at the beginning of the year and got given the worst case scenarios of what the schools and what life was going to look like under COVID. And it was pretty horrific. It was, it made us realize that we needed to actually stop everything that we were planning and get ready for what might have been about to take place, which was huge student absences, huge staff's absences, people in and out and so on. So the first thing we did was we were having an external provider who was going to come, Julia Aitken, and work with us for our teacher-only days at the beginning of the year because we need to up our self-directed learning. So she's coming this term instead, and we spent those 2 days giving staff the time to be able to prepare. And we started and we thought, let's utilise the strengths that we have. So our Tawhiti, we have certain strengths in the way that we run our programs. We have huge relational practice and whānau involvement in learning. So our timetable, we have 6 hours a week of home base, which is like form time on steroids. And in home base, students do project-based learning. They have 15 minutes timetabled one-to-one with their learning advisor each week, so that each week they plan out their learning, their goals, what it's going to look like and so forth. And this one-to-one became vital during the hybrid learning and lockdown last year. They're experienced in self-directed learning because that's our special character, and they're used to off-site and cooperative learning. The other things that helped is that our school is used to organised chaos. Every term, students can change their timetable. So you can imagine the beginning of year chaos. We have that at the beginning of every term. We have really flexible programs and structures. Our students and staff in whānau are adaptable, and we have really clear communication processes, which we have to have because we have so much change. Thanks, Greg. So in our year 1 to 6, we had certain tools for our hybrid learning. So the tools that we used were Seesaw, websites, and Google Classroom. And what became fundamental with the hybrid learning was the relational practice, the 3-way relational practice. It was all about relationships between whānau, students, and the learning advisors. Our school, we didn't roster anyone home at all. We wanted to keep everyone on site as much as possible because, like Tony said, that socialisation is so important. The more we could normalise what was happening, that safety and security of being able to come onto school was vital. At one stage, we did send a couple of classes home in the year 1 to 3 community for a few days when there was in-school transmission, just to break that. But otherwise, we haven't rostered or stopped what we were doing at all. We've managed to stay open the whole time. So with Seesaw, what happens and the websites in Google Classroom in the year 1 to 6 is the first one shows a screen with some books, and that is a parent and a student flicking through to the classroom the books that that particular student has been reading, and then the teacher responds to that and shows that to the class. So even though the student's not in the classroom at that given time, the work that they're doing is shared with the class and the class can respond. And then the next one, Stuffing the Whale, is another example of a student working at home, but still being able to share with the class what's going on. And then the third one is sort of the opposite with the class, doing some play-based learning, and then being able to share with the students at home. And, you know, we can have students doing Lego projects in school on site and have other, because we do student-led workshops, and then have kids at home who are interested in those student workshops being able to hook in and take part. So it was around keeping those connections and that communication going. Thanks, Greg. And then the next one was the year 7 to 13. Like Liz and Tony, although we're not Office 365, we have Google Classroom and Google Sites. Everyone used Google Classroom and Google Sites. Every learning advisor, year 7 to 13, loads their learning for the week, the resources, the programs onto the Google Classroom. So it doesn't matter if a kid is in school or off-site, they're getting access to the same resources and programs and so forth that someone is who is on-site, and vice versa. We continued our one-to-ones. So we, every week, whether the student or the staff member was off-site, unless they were really unwell, they would meet and do one-to-one. So we had teachers zooming into the classroom and chatting to the kids, so that self-directed learning and goal setting and so forth continued. And it was great because we have such strong connections with our whānaus, they were able to come into the one-to-ones and so forth. Thanks, Greg. Just the next one. Okay, that's just some different examples from across the different year groups of the resources that could be created through the hybrid learning, the access. Yep, so I'm just aware of time. So we managed to, a sense of community and connection was maintained. That was vital, as well as the transparency. So every week we sent out case numbers, attendance rates, celebrations, so that families could make really informed decisions about whether, you know, their kids were coming to school or not. Sense of normality during uncertainty. The routine was created through the one-to-ones. We encouraged students to follow the class timetable, but we were flexible enough to allow students, particularly seniors, preferred to follow their own timetable. We tracked engagement and feedback like Tony did. We were really careful with staff workload because they're using the same tool to plan and resource both on and off-site learning. It wasn't that double whammy of having to do things twice. And like Tony, we canned all non-essential meetings. The only meetings we kept were the community meetings, which was around the well-being of students. And we're going to continue. COVID doesn't seem to be going away. For us, we started the term with 91% on-site attendance, which was great, but over the last week, our case numbers have started to steadily increase. Number of kids isolating has increased, and we've dropped 10% attendance. As yesterday, we were 81% attendance. But overall, our whānau and student feedback has been positive. And that's me. Sorry, I just rushed through because, yeah, that's it.
Oh, thanks so much, Anita, for sharing that story. I see a lot of common themes between the three stories: the focus on well-being, the need to be flexible about what traditionally have been quite inflexible practices around assessment, etc. That's obviously coming through loud and clear. What we're going to do, we've run out of time, and I'm so sad to say that, because I kind of imagine this conversation could keep going for a lot longer if we had the time. But what we are going to do is pop ourselves into breakout rooms one more time. Some people I know won't be able to stay, and some people might just want to hang around in those little groups and have a wee chat for a bit longer. So thank you to everyone for giving up your time, particularly our presenters, and best wishes for whatever the term brings us now. And hopefully, you know, the preparation you've done will stand you in good stead as we kind of go forward. Greg, anything from you?
Just from me, it feels like I'm in a lolly shop, you know, the lolly shop and remarkable lolly shop down in Queenstown, you know, like look in the window and you want to go in, but you can't, you know, And it feels like that. It's almost like we've got the lolly shop inside your 3 schools. So I really appreciate you opening the little door and showing us the wrappers and the things that go on, you know, and the realness and vulnerability of that too. So appreciate your time, effort and energy at this time, and giving us that glimpse. So we'll go to the breakouts, give it a chance to be able to have a conversation if you want to. And if you need to shoot off, totally understand that as well. But thank you so much again, Cheryl, for putting on these learning days, or you and your team, but the 3 of you for presenting and sharing today. So cool. We'll see you soon.